everybody, it's Mark. I'm back with another great episode of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. And before I get into my amazing guest this week, I just want to remind everybody, as I always do, about my website, www.markpattisonnfl.com. I've got over 180 podcasts there. Seriously, love people subscribing, referring to others. We've got over 100,000 downloads now. It's not because of me. Certainly it's because of people are being inspired by these amazing places and stories that so many of these guys and girls that I interview come to bear with us. So check that out. Go in, please give a ratings and review. It always helps. Also on that same website, you can find out more about my Everest pursuits. I leave the 31st of March. There is a clock countdown to when that actually happens. And then, of course, there'll be a blog on that website where you can follow the journey of me going up and down. And hopefully I can do that safely, not only going to the top of Everest, but also coming back down at 26,000 feet and then making my way up to the top of the fourth highest mountain in the world, Lhotse, all within 24 hours. No NFL player has done that. I'm trying to be the first. And finally, I continue to partner with Higher Ground, great organization here in Sun Valley, Idaho, also in Los Angeles and New York, with my philanthropy, Millions Everest, the Lhotse Challenge. The goal is to raise $27,940, which is the height of Lhotse. We've actually raised over $31,000. The NFL has also come to partner with us through their social justice program, as well as the Raiders. So very grateful for that. But there is a link there. We continue to fundraise. So helps out so many people. My daughter has epilepsy, and Higher Ground also serves many of the people that who have served in the military. So it's a great cause. And, we're just trying to bring more awareness and dollars to help them through their different issues. Okay, let's get on with the pod today. I want to introduce the CEO of the Iditarod Crazy Race up in Alaska, Rob Urbach. Rob, how you doing?
Doing great. It's really inspiring to be here this morning from dark and snowy Alaska.
So I was trying to figure out like a way to take this podcast, right? And everyone is so different in nature, so many different experiences and where people come from. And I was thinking about like, how does somebody even become the CEO of the Iditarod race held again up in Alaska?
That's a really great question. So my background has been in all sports and back in the day representing some of your colleagues in the NFL as well, and along the NBA and baseball and Olympic sports. So I worked in the sports business my entire career then, but was a triathlete. So I did Ironman Kona at age 19, was the second youngest guy to do so, and could feel some of what you put into your endeavors from a passion and fundraising standpoint and related to that. And somehow that race just, read the Sports Illustrated story when I was in high school and decided that, I want to try that. Know nothing about triathletes, didn't know a triathlete, but figure out how to do that and raise money for the American Heart Association along the way, and came back to that roughly 25 years later when I was recruited for the CEO role of USA Triathlon, which is the governing body of the sport and oversees Ironman and 4,000 plus races, and did that for 6.5 years, and then got recruited for a Iditarod role. And you could think there's some similarities there. They're both extraordinary endurance events. Both are complex. Both have some risk to mitigate. And I really knew very little, frankly, about dogs and mushing and even Alaska at the time, but I know a little bit about event and media and what it takes to really enable a passion. And so if you think about someone doing an Ironman and someone doing the Iditarod, there's a lot of similarities, but there's big differences. That the Ironman, then that day, it's a long all-day workout, but you're going to get a bed, a shower, a massage, a nice meal, and warmth. Not so with the Iditarod. So it's a whole nother level, which really also resonated to me as well. I mean, what it takes, the kind of fortitude and the training and the ability to overcome all sorts of challenges that weren't contemplated on the start line. I'm sure you've experienced in your climbing career. The weather changes are extraordinary. The issues, you have to manage your dogs first. And just to get through that, largely it's an unsupported event. across the Alaska wilderness, off the grid. There's no roads, there's no internet access, there's no service. You're camping out. We're supporting them from safety and from a dog care standpoint. But these rest of the guys are on their own. So I think the events have a similar and be able to understand. I guess my career has been about enabling these passions.
That's amazing. And what I want to do is just go back and set up exactly for anybody that, has had their head in the clouds and doesn't really understand what this race is all about. You kind of set it up a little bit, but let's go a little bit more into detail. My understanding is it's held up in Alaska. There's a ceremonial start in Anchorage, but really the official start is down in the little town called Willow, correct? And this race covers 938 miles, of which there's roughly 50, give or take a few, mandatory stops that you have to come in. I'm sure a lot of that's for the health of the animal. But on these mush sleds, so you've got Malamute. Now, I went to the University of Washington, so I'm a Husky, right? So this is very dear to my heart. Is it a combination of the Siberian and the Malamute Husky that are on these, and how many dogs are on per team?
So you're starting with 14 dogs. The dogs have evolved over the years. Years ago, they were predominantly all Huskies. Now they're bred with Malamute hounds. They're mixed breeds that are sort of purpose bred for their exercise physiology. I mean, these dogs are just aerobic specimen machines. They can go 120, 130 miles a day without any problems. And so what you're doing is it's you and your dog team, your 14 dogs. You're responsible for feeding, snacking, taking care of those dogs along the way. So the stops are primarily about dog care. So they have to stop and do a mandatory vet check. Sometimes the stop can only be 5 minutes. Sometimes there's rest. The mushers, also, I don't know how they do it. I think you have to be the kind of person that can function on massive sleep deprivation, because I think they're sort of sleep deprivation ninjas. They may be averaging, some of the winners have told me I averaged, an hour, 45 minutes a day for 10 straight days. So they're dealing with those issues because when they stop, they've got to feed their dogs. They've got to make sure their dogs are eating properly, et cetera. And they've got to decide, just like if you're an offensive coordinator, what dogs do you move around, what dogs, they can put the dogs in the sled and rest that dog. They can put, they're typically not going to finish, it's just there's people on the sidelines who are going to come in for that dog. And so they're going to switch their dogs around from the different positions in the line. The lead dogs are taking more of the work and push and move them around for the right team chemistry as well. So you have to be strategic about that. You have to navigate. Generally, at some point, the trail gets blown out by the snow and wind, and they have to find the trail, have to break trail, which is very difficult to do. Last year, we had 57 starters, 24 did not finish. We had 3 pretty dramatic Black Hawk helicopter rescues. So typically, they're out there on their own, but the safety protocols are they carry an SOS button. There's 2 buttons on there. One, I'm in trouble, not life or death. Come get me, but you don't have to scramble your rescue air helicopters. Other button is come get me now. Yeah. And then we scramble our aircraft. So the race is supported from the air. There's an Iditarod Air Force of 30 pilots. We fly about 40 planes and 6 helicopters to support the race. So we do move around supplies. We are dropping food bags for the teams along the way. There's 26 food drops along the way. So they're carrying they can't carry all the food that needs. And those dogs are consuming, they're 10 to 15,000 calories a day.
I bet.
And there's a lot of running off the sled. Especially up the hill. You've been to the Alaska range, and they're going to go up and down. Yeah. And they've got to generally get off that sled, and they're running alongside or pushing the sled. Sort of like think about one of those tackling, type things.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So there's a lot of training along those lines and in all kinds of conditions. So it's just an extraordinary event.
Does the word Iditarod have any kind of significance? It's a word and is branded, for me at least, because I know the race, because I grew up in Seattle, so we're not too far away, and I've been on Denali a couple of times. But does it have any kind of significance in terms of that exact word? It means amazing dog or something?
Yeah, great question. Iditarod is roughly the halfway point. It's an old mining town. Back in 1908, I think gold was discovered in Iditarod. At one point, that started the rush of settlers to Alaska, 10,000 people. It's a ghost town now. No one lives there except when we're there. We set up the ghost town camp. But that's when it took $30 million of gold out of that area between like 1908 and 1912. And I guess that might be worth, $3 billion, whatever the math is on that. Yeah. So it was just when, sort of interesting, Alaska was settled in a big gold rush and all the way up into Nome. And so that happened, when dog sled teams were the primary form of transportation. So they're hauling gold out from the mine onto the river. And most of the time it's frozen. They've got to haul it farther, right? So that's when dog teams were delivering the mail and delivering medicine, and sort of echoes back to 1925 when kids of Nome up, Nome is only 9 miles from Russia, it's way up north, were dying of diphtheria, and they couldn't get it. They couldn't fly in 1925 in that kind of weather. They couldn't get there way before snow machines. So the sled dog teams famously, drew serum from all the way from Anchorage, roughly 1,000 miles into Nome to save that community. So there's a couple of movies about that. Disney put one out called Togo, which is sort of like Iditarod honors both those cultures, the whole native sled dog culture that's been away for centuries, and these assisted living communities that are living off, fishing in the summer and trapping in the winter. And they manage their trap lines through their sort of community sled dog teams. And so Iditarod was a big, big part of Alaska's settlement culture. And it's sort of just a halfway point, and it's known that's the Iditarod Trail. So it's the trail to Iditarod and Iditarod, farther up north, all the way to Nome.
I saw a movie within the last year, and I can't remember the name of the movie, and you may have just named it. I can't remember, but it starred Harrison Ford, and really the star of the show was this big dog. It wasn't a Husky. But essentially, the journey of this dog is really being on this sled team to go deliver mail from these little towns that back in the day, I don't know if it was the 1800s or early 1900s, that obviously they didn't have planes and other modern uses that they have today that can actually deliver those different things. But fascinating movie. And I know I'm the people that are listening right now can't actually see what I see, but you have this magical screen behind you with, these dog sled, and it just looks like, just like the movie, that these dogs are out there, their tongues are out, and they're just like having the greatest time. Like this is nirvana for them. They're out, they're running, they're in nature doing their thing.
Yeah, thanks. I think that if every dog would have inspiration to be an Iditarod dog, they'd live a pretty good life. They get to hang out with their buddies. They're on a team. They get to see the northern lights all winter long. They get to go on journeys. And if any dogs have abstract thought, you can see the joy in their body language and how they're emotive. Every time they get on the team and get harnessed up, they're raring to go. I mean, these dogs just are they want to do a backflip. They're so excited. They're really made to run. This is what they're really bred to do. I mean, if you took a sled dog and raised it in your house and bottle fed it, if it saw a bunch of other sled dogs running, it's out of your house and gone. I mean, this is what kind of dogs they are. But the dogs are also very socialized, so they actually make very good pets at the same time. So they're really super high energy dog that are just what they're bred to do, what their instincts are, is to run. And they have a lot of passion for them as well.
Tell me about the profile of the musher. So that's the person that owned the dog there actually in the race. And what I found that was really interesting is that I looked over the roster. It's either for 2021 or this last year, and it seemed like half the roster were women, which surprised me. And then number two, like, how does somebody necessarily get into this? I mean, you're talking about a big commitment. I mean, it's expensive to have at least one dog, let alone 14, or maybe they've even got others on reserve. But I can't imagine you'd have to have the space, the facility, the food, some money, all these different factors to actually pull something like this off.
Yeah, no, it's a big part of their endeavor. I think you're talking about people that are, dog people, one. They will have a kennel of typically someone could have 50 to 100 dogs, and they'll know not just the names, but the idiosyncrasies of each dog like you would your kid. And their ability to relate. Some of them are more comfortable with dogs than people. They're just so focused on that intensity of that relationship with their companions. And so they can stand on a sled and watch dogs for 12 hours a day and say, I'm not bored for 1 second. This is what I love to do. So the Iditarod, it's a lot of time riding on your sled, but they'll tell you that, for 10 days, I was focused on a task the entire time. So they're watching the gait, watching how they run. They decide, I need to move this dog around. So the people that have that, that aptitude, or they learn, but usually it was a dream. And just like you may have decided, gee, I want to climb the 7 summits. I'm going to figure out how to do it. Something about the Iditarod resonated. It resonates with me from an enabler standpoint, but to go out there and do it, that's a whole nother level of at some point along the way, they'll say, you're going to smile along the way, you're going to laugh, but in some way you're probably going to, if you don't cry, you're going to feel like crying because stuff goes wrong. Your sled gets beat up, you have a wreck, there's a lot of, you probably see the guys fall off on a regular basis and get pretty beat up. So it's like getting a hard tackle and getting back up. So they have that, they have something in their soul. And I will tell you that, when they finish, and you may have felt this way in your career in the NFL or by climbing, there's something spiritual about it too, right? So they get to the end, there's a transformation. They've overcome so many obstacles, and they put years into this passion, into the training of the dogs and the feeding. The dogs are going to come to the start line with 3,000 plus miles of training that season. So they're spending a lot of time, and they're out there doing 300-mile runs all by themselves. So they run 100 at camp with their dogs. It could be 40 below. That's like in Denali. So, someone that can withstand all that, and they have to have the combination of the training, of the toughness, of the mental fortitude to get through it all. So it's the kind of person that is just so committed to that dream, to finishing the Iditarod. And you're right, there's not, that there's a little bit of prize money, but that's not what the driver is, right? So it's that finisher's belt buckle that I'm sure that a lot of our, hopefully, listeners can relate to, that can be transformative for them almost in a spiritual way, in the way they talk about it. I mean, when we pulled the 3, last year, these are, pretty tough guys. All 3 were men, and they were only 36 miles from the finish. This is by the helicopter rescue. And they got caught in underflow, which would happen is it was really, really cold and tons of snow last year. So the trail was built up. In some cases, you'd have 9 feet of snow and kind of almost a tunnel style trail. And that got flooded with some wind and underflow, which is the water that's below the snow. There was so much snow last winter that the water, it got insulated so it didn't freeze. And that kind of broke. It was like a dam breaking. It's a slushy, icy mist. And their sled got stuck in sort of this icy quicksand. They got all wet. So then you get worried about hypothermia. Yeah. When you get that kind of wet and you can't deal with it, it's not like you just go towel off, right? So but these guys were just devastated, that they didn't finish. And, the emotion of that, is probably the highs and lows that I'm sure you can experience in climbing, right? So it's pretty, even though the winter comes in slightly, 9 days, finishers about 14 days. So the race gets split up by 5 days. Last year, a group of 11 got held up for 48 hours in a storm. They tried to do it twice and couldn't. The group that got ahead of them got out in front of that storm. They got caught in it and they couldn't see at night because they got stuck in the water area. So there's so many interesting decisions that you make. So I think it's about, you can't second guess that decision. You got to make that decision work. And I think that's the mentality is they kind of have plans, how they're going to rest, when they're going to fast, when they're going to camp. And then all that usually gets destroyed after, with the next first storm that comes in. are the first problem that they have with their sled, or some of their dogs not having a good day. So there's so many challenges, and it's like with life, right? So I think what it does is it's being able to deal and adapt and be able to constantly innovate on the fly when you might, be dealing with a hypothermia. You might, you've got to worry about feeding yourself, and you've got some sleep deprivation. You might be hallucinating and not knowing what's real and not real. So it's in my mind, it's just, I am in awe of what they can do to finish this race. And at the same time, they got to take care of the work in their lives that they're so responsible for.
Yeah, I'll tell you what is surprising to me, and I'm blown away by this, is that, first of all, there's a guy named Mitch Seavey who did the course record in 8 days, which was amazing, in a couple hours. And but there's been a number. I think it's Susan Butchard. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Who has won 2 or 3 times. But the number of women who, I personally don't know any gals, maybe one, Rebecca Rush here in Sun Valley. You probably know her. That biked it. But beyond that, I mean, it's pretty hardcore to see women well represented in this race, to go through all the grit, the gut, the glory, the things that push you down, the minus 100 degree. And mind you, remind the listener that this race is run in early March. So, on your best day, even when I was up there in late May and we got caught up in minus 80 degree weather, in Alaska, you got the Bering Sea, you've got that swirl, you just never know what's going to hit. So, what is it from just focusing on the women's side, which seems so empowering? I mean, maybe you just said it already, once you get through it, it's almost a spiritual experience that happens in transformation. Maybe that's it. But it sure seems like women are well represented in this race.
They are. And there's some very tough women. Ali Zirkle has 4 two-time finishes, and she's racing again this year. I think what it is one thing that's really important is your relationship with your dogs. And the best mushers will sort of tell you that it's how you emote to your dogs, if you're frustrated, and that conveys, the dogs need to trust you as well. So, I don't want to necessarily gender cast here, but if women are usually a little better emotionally, and there's a notion, maybe a theory that, they're really great sometimes about emoting properly and connecting, with their dogs, so their dogs will trust. And the mushers will tell you, this is what Mitch would say, is that, it's really, I'm slowing my dog team down, right? If I I'm at a checkpoint and I'm trying to get organized, and all of a sudden I lost 45 minutes because, I wasn't focused and wasn't going through my motions efficiently as I could, and then I show frustration, with the dogs, that's gonna get just like a coach would, right? Your team chemistry. So women may be, some women may be really great at that, but I think in general they're just some really impressed with the women in the race. Absolutely, you have Didi Johnroe, who might weigh 100 pounds, who's done this race 30 times, who's also an Ironman triathlete, and just a really tough person, and they're extraordinary. I mean, we have to deal with, last year there was a lot of moose on the trail because there was so much snow. They were really taking over the trail, and if you got a bunch of moose there and they're in danger, the only thing you can do is unfortunately shoot the moose. But the rule is that you can't just shoot the moose and then go. You have to gut the moose so it'll preserve properly for food. And so the local community, and you radio in, someone will come with some. Anyway, so they've got to do the same thing. They got to shoot the moose, skin the moose properly. You can't go on. That's the rule. You can't waste the moose. So they've got to know what they're doing out there.
I've run into moose several times here in Sun Valley, and those things are not, they do not negotiate. Like if they're in the trail, they're in the trail and they're not moving.
Right.
They're dumb and aggressive, and that's a bad combination, as you know. So in terms of a couple things here, do you have any one particular story? And I can't imagine if you have 50 plus dog teams of 14. You've got hundreds of dogs out there, right? Is there any one story that comes to your mind that you've seen that there's some amazing connection? Maybe the dog saved the musher. I don't know what that would be. I'm just trying to think of some extraordinary example where there's some dog that did something that was so amazing. Rather than just look at the whole team as one, this one particular just gutted this out and either saved the race, won the race, did something extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those stories, and sometimes the dogs have done 7 or 8 Iditarods, so they know the trail. And especially up along the coast, along the Bering Sea, with this trail getting blown out, the winds are just hauling. I mean, there's stakes in the trail, but they get snowed out. The trail gets totally blown out. And if you can't find the trail, that's a world of hurt, because you could be going through several feet of snow, and that's just you're going 1 mile an hour when your dog teams normally can run at 10 miles an hour. So there's some really great stories where lead dogs, have resisted the musher and basically said, no, the trail's over to the right, and you think it's to the left. You're the musher. There's so much snow going down. If you get disoriented, you don't know which way is up, down, left, right. It gets real confusing. And you've got 10 days we've been on the trail, and this is sort of up closer to the finish. And these dogs just know the route. And so you're relying upon their processor that's better than yours, which is really some interesting stories. And there's some mushers that we're trying to say, I'm pretty sure it's left. This is where my gut tells me, I think I understand how the horizon is, and, there's no sun. I can't really see. It could be night. And the dog knows the way. So that's pretty interesting that they have a better internal compass than we do, especially under stress. The others are, frankly, people fall off the sled, and, that lead dog has got to feel that, got to hear it, got to sense that, and stop, turn the team around, go back and check. And there's some cases where the musher's been in trouble, and the dogs have been able to revive a fallen musher off the sled, and they know that. So it's just they're a good 20 feet ahead, and can just sense the little differential of that and hear it and know, hey, I better go check on my coach, right? On my leader, on my driver, on my athlete back there.
Let's talk about the other side of it for a minute, and let's talk about the animal rights. And I'm not here to criticize anything. I think it's an amazing race, but do you get that at all from the standpoint of, yeah, it sounds like you do. So what do you have to deal with on that front?
Yeah, it's almost a daily basis. I think animal rights team folks have, like to put out a campaign of disinformation that, our dogs are dropping dead, that, the dogs are abused, that they're freezing in an Arctic nightmare. They'll say things like, if a dog is lucky enough to survive the Iditarod, they're crippled for life. Well, if that were true, every single dog on the start line would be a rookie. They should be good teams, all veteran teams. They'll race their puppy teams. They'll race their puppy team for about 400 miles and drop that dog. That's the plan. So I've invited them up to Alaska to come to our kennels, come watch our race. It's unfortunate they don't seem to have any interest in having a conversation around facts or objectivity. I've invited them to have independent veterinarian panel come and review our kennels, come review our race, come review our rules. They seem disinterested in having any real open dialogue. I went down to PETA's headquarters in Los Angeles. I took a dog who had been in 8 Iditarods, took the dog into their meeting room, and I said, I've got your website open. It says that all dogs are going to either die or be crippled if they run the Iditarod. Here's a dog at 8 Iditarods who's running around the room and super friendly. And I said, guys, you're just making statements are not true. But we're a big fundraiser for them. It looks, they can show pictures of the Arctic and freezing. Our problem is with global warming, it's gotten warmer and warmer up here. So, these dogs run best below 0 degrees. It gets above 20, we're not running very hard. So the race really now moves. If it gets above 20, all the action's happening at night, because the dogs, you don't want your dog to overheat, which is a bigger problem than, our dogs are not getting frostbitten and things at the PETA states. So, it's just unfortunate that they use a lot of propaganda, and they'll take a photo of a dog maybe yawning on a nice day in straw, and they'll say, that dog's exhausted. So, they'll twist everything around. And unfortunately, I just, wish we could have a dialogue. I've offered to them, gee, if there's something that we're doing that you think we shouldn't do, let us know. And the only thing they want to do is, we'll stop the Iditarod. Well, that's not the conversation. We want to talk. I think we do a lot for welfare. We're disseminating all we understand from what we do a lot of research with veterinary schools on exercise physiology. We put out some protocols that can help all dogs. So we continue to do that and disseminate information on wellness and training. You want to take your dog in your local 5K, your dog's on the couch. Well, here's what you should probably do to get that dog ready. So we have a whole Ask the Vet program. We're creating content on general wellness, on nutrition, on training, on genetics and breeding. So we're starting to disseminate that for people that, own dogs, love dogs, or just interested in dogs through all of our media. So it's been unfortunate because I think what we do is, kind of the anecdote for kids of the thumb generation. It's about self-reliance. There's a lot of stuff we do for kids. We do a junior Iditarod event, which is 150 miles. They spend one night on the trail. And we're supportive of there's a lot of other smaller community style races that we sort of create an unofficial sanction for. We put the rules together. We're putting the thought leadership together for exemplary dog care. And the truth of the matter is, the dogs are in kennels, that they live to 18, 19. They're sort of blue zones for dogs. They're super healthy. They get great wellness care. So like I said earlier, if I were a dog, I'd want to be a Iditarod dog.
Yeah.
So, it's just something that, sure, there's been some instances, and I guess you could compare it to, CTE in the NFL, right? So yeah, there's been some issues in the past. I think we've evolved a lot, just like rules have changed in the NFL, right? So I think we've evolving over the years in being more woke about it, I guess is the right word, over the last 20, 30 years. But what they're saying, that it just doesn't happen, that, these dogs are abused and neglected and crippled. And, it's just a lot of assertions that aren't based on any real data, any real facts.
So the race has been around since 1973, and part of that, part of my notes here is that there are 3 mandatory stops along the way. So I know there's 50 mini stops, but there's 3 where you have to spend at least 8 hours before you can move on and that type of thing. So you guys are trying to be thoughtful, not only about the dogs, but also about the mushers. So they're not going on an hour and a half sleep, every single night for, 8 to 15 days. Let's talk about COVID and what that has done or not done in terms of the preparations in this past year, because really COVID hit last March. Well, it happened January, I think, the first documented case, but I can distinctly remember driving out to California from Sun Valley with all my bags ready to go to Mount Everest, thought we were going to go, and then the whole world shut down, right? Now we're about 3 months out, right, till this race hits again for you guys. What kind of preparations are you making, and what kind of impact has that had on you?
Yeah, so last year it broke out during the race, and so we were having conversations about potentially stopping our race midstream. We started March 7th, we finished March 22, so it was just by middle of that March is when everything shut down.
Yep.
And we were in the midst of it. So fortunately, we've really been embedded with authorities, with the state chief medical officer and all the state public health folks for this year's race. We've been planning that really since coming off the trail last year. So we've had to make some modifications in our course. Alaska is an interesting state, in certain respects, it's very libertarian, but in certain respects, the native villages are probably the most restrictive villages in the country. You can't get access. You can't come in. If you leave, you can't come back. So they have a heightened sensitivity because they've been wiped out by flus over the years. There may be some less immunity, and there's certainly less health care. The stops, if people or stops, are usually a village of 150 people that's sort of holding on to assistance living. Maybe there's one nurse who travels there, and they have, one room clinic with, there's really no ventilators or ICU facilities. So they have issues. And then there's issues and they can't get medevac because of weather. So they've had some unfortunate fatalities due to COVID because of that. So there's certain sensitivities there. So as a result, they all have landing strips. They get a weekly mail run and supplies, and the paranoia was such, and maybe rightfully so, they wouldn't even let us land. So in certain respects, we're taking 4 days to build our own landing strip and putting in our own camping checkpoint. So we've rearranged the course. We're sort of going to Iditarod and looping around. So for the first time ever, we're actually going to go back up the Alaska range. We got to go up and down the Alaska range twice, which is much they're saying this might be the hardest race ever because of that. It all depends on the trails like and the weather. The weather is so iffy there. So we've had to make arrangements. So we knew we could probably do it, but at some point in time, we said we're not going to compromise safety standards for dogs or humans. And if we're camping out all the way along the trail, we could let a lot of stress in our system. So right now we're planning sort of 3 totally constructed, camps that, there's no power, no running water, of course, no internet, anything that we need. So we have to create all that as best that we can to put a camp out in the middle of the wilderness to ensure our safety standards. So it's a lot more work, but, we're excited about it. You're right, it's the 49 state race. If we're in the 49th state, there's something pretty special and unique about that. And this year's belt buckle will be remarkable for all those reasons. And then the COVID structure is just changing everything. We do business differently. Obviously the good news is that we're outside, we're by nature socially distant. So we feel that we can run our event with close to no guarantees, but the goal is 0 transmission through all the multiple rounds of testing that we're going to do. Our ceremonial piece, where there's a crowd angry, is completely being redone. Think about the way football is played with 10% in the stadium. So that's sort of our model right now that we're tweaking, but the integrity of the race will be preserved. Some of the sponsorships and activations, and, we take people out on the trail. We're not going to do any media, will be light, and there'll be no sort of, VIP experiences and all the stuff that we do on the ancillary side, but the core of the race will remain. We will be able to stream it. So we do stream it 24/7. We've got 2 crews that have their own plane. We have 2 planes to do that with, and they're sort of self-contained traveling pods. They're camping out too. I don't know how these guys do it. I mean, you can do it, right? But they've got to do it and keep all their gear working at the same time in those conditions. So it's, they're intense. They've got some propane heaters in those tents to keep everything warm enough, but it's still a tough go. And usually they can use these communities. Have one kind of building that we can use. It's a school. It's a community building. We can't have access to that. So it's a whole different dynamic to be able to produce this race. So we're hopeful that we can pull it off, and everything's done by satellite. Your cell phone's not going to work out there. So sometimes we won't know exactly what the opportunities and challenges are.
Yeah, that's awesome. Typically, we'll go back to the beginning. We talked about you have this ceremonial launch in Anchorage. It sounds like that is not happening. And it sounds like there's a modified version of whatever that is, usually where there's a big crowd, both for when people take off, also at the finish line, that you're going to have down in Willow. Explain that.
Yeah, I mean, we're still going through what the protocols will be, but imagine that you have, fenced in areas, and you'd have to have the right, whether it's a phone app or, an armband that, allows you access. And that means right now that you're coming in with a negative test. So that protocols are very restrictive regarding that. And there's all sorts of, rules, even in the state of Alaska. If you come to Alaska right now, you have to quarantine, even if you tested. So it's a 5-day quarantine, then you get another test. The theory is, if you're negative, you got to, while you travel, the test's not going to pick it up till 5 days.
Yeah.
So all of our people coming in, it's a big ordeal. We usually have 55 veterinarians flying in from lower 48, and now we got to put them on the shelf for 5 days, retest them again. So it's a process where, it'll be diminished from a spectator standpoint. It'll be a relatively quiet stadium, with only people that are on our list or having access. So still think it's going to be great. Be to watch it off of our insider streamcast. So, but it won't be the same experience. We're planning. Hopefully the numbers will be better and there'll be some progress in the vaccine, but we can't count on any of that happening. So we really hope that we're a symbol of, light at the end of the tunnel is happening, that we can pull off our event in a different way. We can still bring immersive experience to those that are watching, our live stream. We just don't quite, something special about being there and being at, eye level and seeing the dogs. Not a lot of people are going to be able to do that this year, unfortunately. But, we're just adapting as best that we can. We're going to be loading up for a big party for our 50th year in 22, and we hope COVID will, soon be way behind us. But for this year, not a lot of spectating opportunities.
As they say, it is what it is, right?
Right.
Hey, listen, so give us, I'm going to ask you, where can people find you? This is the race, of course, but, and also pinpoint this live stream, and it might be on that same website that you guys have. Yeah,
you can find it. It's called Insider on Iditarod.com. And we have a lot of content about, not just about the race, but for all dog owners and people interested in getting outside and running or biking or ski touring with their dogs. So we think we put a pretty good show during the race. It's a pretty unique process that we do, and it's kind of what Iditarod stands for. We think it's pretty innovative.
Well, it's, listen, your hashtag has changed the narrative, and it sounds like you are, right? It's an amazing race, amazing accomplishment for anybody. I mean, somebody who wins, incredible. Somebody who finishes, amazing. I mean, it's just a brutal 938 days in the peak of a lot of that cold, harsh winter environment in the great state of Alaska. So listen, man, I appreciate you coming on the pod. So insightful about this incredible race. When I saw that you were the CEO, I jumped at the chance and the opportunity to have you on. I just wanted to learn more about it, and I think other people will too. So thank you so much for that.
Appreciate your time. Happy New Year and good luck in Everest.
Right on. Okay, thank you. There he is, the one and only Rob Urbach. Thank you. Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. Okay, if you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.